I now introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Padraic Rohan. Padraic had previous lives as a public school teacher, a nonprofit founder and director, and a foreign correspondent in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. The title of his talk today is Evolution versus Intelligent Design.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And can everybody hear me? Please signal if you can't. And I know often there's some sort of reading or some sort of quote to begin, and many of us have read Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. In which Huck and Jim are living this fugitive life on the Mississippi. Right? So there's this beautiful passage from this that is a great way to start. We had the sky up there. This is Huck talking, right? We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars. And we used to lay on our backs and look up at them and discuss about whether they was made or only just happened. Jim, he allowed they was made, but I allowed that they happened. I judged it would have took too long to make so many. Jim said the moon could have laid them. That looked kind of reasonable, so I didn't say anything against it, because I've seen a frog lay most as many. So of course it could be done. We used to watch the stars that fell too, and then streak down. Jim allowed that they had gotten spoiled and hove out of the nest. I'm very fortunate to have had many conversations like this as a boy and as an adult, and in sometimes in places like this. No matter who we are and what we believe or don't believe, contemplating the mystery of the universe is a deeply inspiring and often a deeply humbling thing. Were we created? Did we only just happen? And I'd like to highlight two of the Unitarian principles at play here. The third, acceptance of one another. And the fourth, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. These things are super difficult to embody and practice, right? Especially when we're looking for a contested truth, fighting for a contested truth. I hope that exploring this in this way, which totally brings in a lot of no doubt this will have implications for the political polarization of this country or the way that we interact with each other. I hope that this, as a kind of a tolerably abstract, in some ways, thing, which certainly has political implications, will help us to get to a better place about this. Now, full disclosure, I am a firm proponent of evolution. Charles Darwin, in his famous 1859 book on the origin of species, was part of a revolution in our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of the world. This revolution we are still very much grappling with today. We are all related to all other forms of life on this planet. We all come from the same grain, nourished by the same rain. We were forged in battles long forgot, that raged in primeval sea and in Mesozoic burrow and in jungle canopy. We owe our lives to the love of a mother who crouches dim in the mists of time. The wonder and the glory of it. In this very short talk, I want to do more than say why I'm pro-evolution. I imagine I'm mostly preaching to the choir here. Rather, I want to try to convince you of something else, that the proponents of evolution must wrestle with some valid criticisms of the theory of evolution, both in the science and in the larger philosophical implications. And that given these problems, there is really very little room for smugness on our part in terms of how right we are. If I were giving this talk to a different audience, say one that was mostly pro-intelligent design, I would change the presentation a bit, but the core message would remain the same, that intelligent design does not rise to the level of a rival theory, but at its best, that's a big at its best, it does offer a strong and necessary critique of the theory of evolution. And so the usual assumption back in 1859 and also today is that there is a fundamental opposition between religion and science. I will call these people the ultras. The ultras on the pro-Darwin side and the ultras on the anti-Darwin side, each of whom has, over the past century and a half and more, each of whom has lived off the excesses of the other. The ultras very much justify each other's existence. But weirdly, as vehemently opposed as these two camps are, they all share the underlying assumption that Darwinism is inherently godless. One side views this as a good thing, the other side, of course not. They all believed that Darwin robbed us of our meaning and purpose, and that we had previously had, in the previously enchanted world. This was kind of the language especially used in the late 19th century. Again, one side is gleeful about this loss of enchantment, and the other side is profoundly disturbed by it. So many, both pro and anti, are convinced that the theory of evolution is essentially hostile to religion. But we can ask, is this actually true? History tells us no, and guides us out of the prison of the moment that especially the ultras of both sides are very much trapped in. One of the key prisoners of the moment, the leader of the pro-evolution ultras, Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous atheist currently alive on the planet, believes that there is no more mystery in the universe. We humans are mere, this is a quote, gigantic lumbering robots in thrall to our selfish genes. All is random accident. There's no purpose or meaning in anything, anywhere to be found in this formerly wondrous universe, and anyone who thinks otherwise is an uneducated moron. Dawkins has said he cannot imagine being an atheist prior to 1859, and likewise that he cannot imagine not being an atheist after Darwin. Okay, but many people were atheists prior to Darwin, and plenty of people who were pro-evolution after Darwin have not been atheists. So how do we fit all of this into our worldview? We can really break down the polarization between these camps of warring ultras when we understand that what was called evolution and creationism and intelligent design, as creationism was kind of rebranded about a generation ago, that the meaning of all these terms has changed greatly over time. In the late 19th century, we see evolutionary notions even among evangelical Christians. Many Christians of the time embraced the study of the fossil record, allowed for the possibility of life prior to the Garden of Eden, and many evolutionists, for their part, continued to insist on some sort of divine intervention, especially regarding the origins of humans. This is more or less the current Catholic position. The intellectual distances between evolutionists and creationists was not as great as we would think, and given how loud the ultras always are. One of my students said recently in a different context, to be extreme is to be heard. And this is such a wonderful, pithy way to kind of sum up both the reality and the challenge, then and now. It is so hypnotizingly easy to be an ultra. Our society incentivizes such behavior and beliefs. But an ultra cannot accept person, going back to our third principle, right? Cannot truly accept someone who's not firmly 10 toes down in their own camp. And for our other principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the ultra gets the free part quite readily and struggles with the responsible part of that. In 1909, there were big celebrations. This was the 50th anniversary of the publication of On the Origin of Species. And Darwin had spoken of natural selection. That was the term he used. He actually didn't use the term evolution, at least not in the first several editions of his great work. So natural selection, small, minuscule changes, over geological time. Some of those changes conferred an advantage on the changed organism, who then subsequently passed those advantages on to his or her offspring. At the 50th anniversary, however, 1909, the most commonly accepted understanding of evolution did not highlight natural selection. That was a part of it, but people were thinking of evolution in a much broader way as well. And this is very different from the way we mostly think of evolution today. When I was in 8th grade in Catholic school, we read the play Inherit the Wind and then watched the movie. As many of you know, this portrays the famous 1925 Stopes monkey trial, right? In which a high school teacher, John Stopes, is on trial for teaching evolution. William Jennings Bryan is the villain of the account. And for years, I assumed the basic truth of the portrayal that the play and the film had. But Bryan, surprisingly or not, was not the biblical literalist that the play depicts him as. He was what they called in those days a day-age adherent. That was what they called it, meaning that he interpreted Genesis generously to allow for the 6 days of creation, each being possibly geological ages long, trying to balance the Bible and science. But he was firmly opposed to Darwinism, which he called a dogma, quote, of darkness and death, robbing ordinary people of meaning and purpose and paralyzing consciences. This, he and many others maintained, had been the reason for the horrors of World War I. He opposed eugenics as well, which was rampant throughout the Western world at the time, often with a Darwinian veneer. In America, for example, we had forced sterilizations of folks in mental hospitals and on indigenous reservations. Much, much more. We can get into that later if we want to. Bryan and many others, including many pro-evolution folks, found this incompatible with their Christian faith. The point is not that Bryan was actually the good guy and Clarence Darrow and John Stokes were actually the bad guys. No. The point would be rather both creationists and evolutionists used that old so-called science of craniometry, data on brain sizes, demonstrate their assertions that various, they're effectively racist and sexist judgments about which people are either more or less intelligent by their judgment. So the point, rather, is to acknowledge that if the distinction between good guys and bad guys in this instance, in history, tolerably distant from us, is not as clean as we had once thought, then maybe that can give us some valuable breathing space today to search, question at least some of the lines that we thought were so clean and so bright, to search our consciences for unwarranted certainties and smugness on our part. The 20th century saw the rise of creation science, or scientific creationism, now called intelligent design. And the movement got steadily more extreme as the 20th century wore on, more extreme than Bryan and his contemporaries would have allowed. Meanwhile, the ultras on the pro-evolution side were also hard at work. So at 1959, so the centennial of the publication of Darwin's great work, most scientists in the field had reduced evolution to natural selection, a strict selectionism, allowing only for gradual and minuscule changes over geological time frames. And this is more or less where we are today, although some evolutionists, of course, dissent. The ultra position has never convinced many attentive observers. In the 1970s, two dissenting evolutionists introduced the idea of what they called punctuated equilibrium, that evolution does not merely do its work over geological timeframes, but there are fits and starts involved. We observe long periods in the Earth's history where very little changes, and then short moments punctuated by sharp breaks and bursts of change in the fossil record. And this is where it gets interesting. So the pro-evolution ultras vigorously resisted the idea of punctuated equilibrium. The intelligent design folks, again, surprisingly or not, have taken this argument kind of as their own, gleefully portraying the position of the pro-evolution ultras as the final laud word on evolution itself. And the pro-evolution ultras and the media appear completely fine with this. They indeed embrace this polarization. You're either with us or you're with the crazies and the biblical literalists. Those are the only two real options here. But in this case, the anti-evolution side has very cleverly adopted at least elements of a quite moderate and sensible position. Again, you wouldn't know this if you're just reading Scientific American or the science section of the New York Times. On a deeper level, the enduring appeal of intelligent design rests on two things. First, religion's continuing power to inspire, for better and for worse. And second, the hostility that many of the educated have for religion. So the song Imagine, we talked about this last week a little bit with Dr. Manning. This is the song Imagine is something of an anthem for this church, and it illustrates what can at times become a class issue. John Lennon, of course, was among the most famous people on the planet when he wrote this song about a potential world without religion. And he inspired a huge number of people, not exclusively by any stretch, but largely from the educated classes. That doesn't mean always rich, right? Many other people, however, some with little wealth or status or education, take their inspiration elsewhere. And it takes all kinds to make a world. You know, this need not be a stark binary here. As a Catholic and a historian and a kind of an aspiring philosopher, Lennon's philosophy is not my jam, but at the same time, some of the best and most thoughtful people I know are atheists. They would be, you know, far more with John Lennon. I would have loved, if he hadn't been assassinated, I would have loved to have chopped it up with him later in life. From the 19th century on, both creationists and evolutionists, well, let's talk about the creationists and the current pro-intelligent design movement. They've taken some good ideas from the evolutionists. The pro-evolution camp can and should do the same. And to do so, we kind of have to come down off the high hill of the ultras. So to conclude, I'd like to return to Huck and Jim, lying there on their backs. Far from that battle between the warring ultras, two outcasts, wondering whether their stars were made or only just happened. That only just is kind of carrying a lot of weight here. Nothing and nobody made the universe. Just happened. Just a random accident. Okay. How and why did it happen? What was behind the random accident? Well, it only just happened. Okay. So we're in the curious position of an atheist or an agnostic or a non-religious person making the claim that the how and the why don't matter. This all is randomness. That's all you need to know. Sounds remarkably like the something from nothing. Sounds, you know, all too similar to kind of a claim you get from, say, a fundamentalist believer. There was nothing, and then there was something. Can't really explain it, and you just have to take it on faith. Perhaps, at least some of the time, we're striving for the same truth and using different language to attempt to make sense of it all. It's a hard truth that many educated folks, thinking that we've left, I speak entirely for myself here, we think we have left dogma behind and we become susceptible to another kind of dogma. The reigning ultra-orthodoxy of evolution, led by Richard Dawkins and the New Atheists, is not completely wrong. But at that philosophical level, it is wildly out of its lane to attempt to dictate what does and does not have meaning and purpose. Ordinary folks trying to get by and live a life of dignity and purpose are not wrong to smell something fishy. A good step forward for us, the pro-evolution camp, would be to, frankly, be less stuck up. Accepting one another doesn't merely mean accepting those who think like us. Let's be more like Huck and Jim, you know, playing with ideas, exchanging ideas. Let's embrace with humility the challenge of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, knowing that the truth has never been tribal. The sincere search for the truth is difficult, and it will indeed change us in ways that we cannot imagine.